All right. Probably one of the best vibrant spirits up there on PodMatch. I found her, Sara Alepin. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you, Alex.
And I'm so happy that PodMatch connected us. Now, I understand you are what, the CEO of District Bliss. Tell us your story and also uh, why you joined PodMatch. I'm curious as well. But tell us your story first.
Do you want the full story or do you just want my business and what
Oh, the
we
full
do
story, because it
story?
sounds like you're a very eclectic person. You do podcasts, you're a photographer. I mean, a lot going on there. Tell us.
Yes. So my story is a little different. So I was a photography teacher back in the day, and I ended up, because you can't really survive on a teacher's salary, if we're being honest here. My summer job, which is like your side hustle as an entrepreneur, would be like the equivalent. Um, was photography. So I started photographing weddings and that kind of thing so I could have my personal income goals. And I ended up getting attacked by a student while I was teaching. And he actually damaged the nerve in my leg, and I wasn't able to go back to teaching afterward. But I wasn't just gonna like sit around and do nothing. So, or, sit around and whatever the equivalent would be. So I decided to lean into the photography business and I kicked it into high gear, but I knew I needed support because I wasn't going to be able to do long standing work that was physical without support. So I started trying to go to these networking events, and I was met with people who didn't really understand my networking goals, because my networking goals were to refer clients out, because that is client care too. If you can't take it, having another photographer to refer to is really good client care. So I was looking for that. I was also looking for photographers that I could pay really, really well in order to support me in my photography gigs that I had. But I got a lot of the where you go in, you introduce yourself, and then they say, "Oh, you're a photographer, I'm a photographer," and then turn around and close you out of the circle. And it was really discouraging. So I ended up launching District Bliss as a networking organization where the goal was to come together, to collaborate, to support one another, to provide resources and share expertise with one another so that we could really build our businesses in a way that felt good. And we felt like we had a place of like mind where we could meet like-minded entrepreneurs who really cared about each other.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you took that outsiderish kind of nature and did something with it, right? And I feel like that's an inspirational too, because when people are on the outside, they're like, "What do we do next?" Now you found the answer, didn't you?
I did. I did. I'm not one to take something lying down.
No. Well, and I see you're a podcast host, and I don't know. I thought you had some comedy in you as well because your picture is very funny, and I'm like, she's got to be some kind of comedian. And you do some comedic podcasts, right?
Yes. So I have the Wedding Dish, which is my professional podcast.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also have Laughing with Gingers, where my friend, who is also a redhead and entrepreneur, we do a lot of like trivia, and
Mm-hmm.
it's like a quiz show. And it's very funny and just light and a lot of just entertainment.
Well, Sarah, I got to say, now that you're here with us today, your wedding photography, I mean, I'm sure you're still booking those for 2025, but tell us why you love it so much. Like, what is that a passion of yours now?
It is. I love weddings so much. And it's funny because most people, when they find out, they're always like, oh my gosh, that must be so stressful. Or, oh my gosh, you must be dealing with like X, Y, and Z, mothers who are this and couples who are this. But the reality is that I don't really have those experiences because I only take the couples that I really connect with. So I love it. I love the energy surrounding it. I'm an extrovert, so for me, they give me a ton of energy and really fill my bucket. But it's the relationship building that goes into the entire process of the wedding, not just the wedding day with the couple, because you get to really know them as humans and their story. And then you get to actually take that knowledge of what matters to them and who they are as people and create and tell this story and document this story that then you give back to them that shows them who they are as
Right.
humans, not just the day itself.
And I don't know if you mix the two, but you ever find in your networking group that happens where like a couple gets engaged in the networking group or married? Has that happened before?
That has happened before. Yeah, I get a lot of referrals from there too.
Amazing. No, that's why it's good to be so connected. So,
Yeah,
I know that for photographers it's kind of stressful. You gotta get the people in the position and all that, but you love that. You love sort of being the choreographer, right?
I do. I do. And of course, my education background is really helpful in that because I had to manage classrooms, which
Yeah.
is, I mean, managing high schoolers who are in the dark room for half of your classroom
Yeah.
is, very much like managing emotional dynamics and family dynamics that go into the wedding day and coordinating and the posing and the timing and all that.
Mhm.
Very similar skill set.
All right. Well, I didn't lose the fact that you told me you were attacked by a student. So as you know, I cover adaptability. Talk about the adaptations after that. And I mean, it sounds like, were you scared to go back into the classroom, or how long after did it take that you actually left the teaching world, if you will?
I tried to go back for a really, really long time. I do have PTSD. It is in remission. The adaptations, so I really did fight to go back because I loved teaching darkroom photography. I would have done that for the
Sure.
rest of my life for sure. I still am in touch. I photographed so many of my former students, like
Oh,
weddings and their maternity sessions, and then like their family sessions and stuff. So I'm still in touch with a lot of them, which is really lovely. But it was really hard. There were weeks when I would get like 4 to 5 hours of sleep the entire week, while I was trying to like force myself to go back into the classroom, which I mean is obviously not healthy for many reasons. I remember on Fridays driving home and I would be like, I don't remember going through that stretch of road. Um,
wow.
so there was a lot that went into that. And because it is my right leg, there were issues, of course, with driving then too. So in terms of adaptations, there was a lot of like figuring out what my ability was for standing. I had to relearn to walk because, if you are compensating, I ended up with tarsal tunnel syndrome because I was compensating, which is, I mean, most people know about carpal tunnel because that's
Sure.
the
Yeah.
nerve issue in your wrist when you work a lot. It's the same, but it's in your ankle. Um,
Mm.
so I was then having my foot drop on the outside as I was walking and I was pushing off, which then causes all these problems up the rest of your body. So periodically I've had to go back to physical therapy when I realize I'm compensating. I'll start to get pain in one part of my body or the other, and I'll be like, are you pushing off again? And I'll have to like consciously think about it and then go back to PT if I can't correct it
And
myself.
by the way, if you've been to a wedding, you know the photographer is always walking around. So did that impact the actual, in for you, the actual career of doing that, or did you adapt to being in the wedding photographer during all this?
I had to bring in multiple photographers for weddings in the beginning, even more so than I do now, because now I really know my limitations. Then I was still kind of figuring out if my pain was gonna go up to like a 9 or a 10, then I was gonna have a real problem at the wedding, and I couldn't risk someone else's wedding for me to try to push through that.
Mm.
Because like, if you're talking about and ironically, redheads have a very high pain tolerance.
I did not know that. That's
Yes,
interesting.
we also require more anesthesia.
Huh.
Um, yeah, who knew?
No, yeah,
Um,
that's interesting that you've culminated all these facts. That's very cool. Now, is that on the podcast? You talk about stuff like this on the
we
show, or?
do, yeah. Which is how I learned that. And then, of course, my doctors have since told me, like, apparently we bleed more. There's a lot of weird things with redheads and genetics and medical stuff, which is so
Mm.
fascinating. Actually, one of my doctors, when I was going through this whole thing, when I walked in, he said to me, I was really nervous as soon as I saw that you were a redhead. And I
No,
was
wow.
like, oh man, that is not what you want to hear from a doctor. Although I did appreciate the transparency and he worked really hard and did help me a ton.
Now, did
Um,
this affect the way you developed the photo? Like, this attack happened in the dark room, right? Is that right, or did
it
it
happened
happen
in the hallway.
in the hallway? Thank God, not in the dark room then.
Hmm.
But did your experience in these, developing the photos in a dark room, did that change as well? Did this PTSD cause you to think a little differently when you're in that room and it is dark? I mean, I don't know. It just got to scare you a little bit. I'm guessing.
Not that. That didn't, but the crowds. So if I
Mm,
was like going through the dance floor or anything like that at a wedding, that was really triggering. I had to
wow.
find people that would, like other photographers that I would, bring with me as my additional. I never call them second shooters because for me, they're not. They are. They are equal to me. I may be driving the train on this, but they
Sure.
are like as talented. They are people that if I had to lift out of the wedding, I would absolutely trust them. They are incredibly talented and lovely and brilliant.
You just hit
But
on an incredible point about the leadership that you have at these weddings. I guess that's how you became a CEO because you found you're a leader, right? Even
yeah.
though, whatever was happening with that networking group, you found yourself to be a leader and it's translated in all forms of life now, right? So talk about the impact of feeling that leadership skill and what you would impart to my listeners today when it comes to leadership.
Oh, that's a great question. I think really trust yourself and think about how you can elevate the people around you. So, the way I just talked about my other photographers that work with me, they're not second to me, they are my equals. And
Mm-hmm.
everything that I do, the goal is to elevate them so that everyone knows they are my equals. In no way are they any less than me. And I think that that is one of my strongest leadership traits. Also, really listening to people when they're talking, not just waiting for your turn to interject and share a resource. Sometimes it's very much like, you want to share a resource and you're really excited because you heard this person has a problem. Listen to the whole thing that they're saying and really
Mm-hmm.
absorb that and internalize that and carry that with you because as you go, you may have a callback to that. Like it's very much kind of like podcasting where you do callback between like if there's an episode that you have that is
Mm-hmm.
related, you can do a callback and then people are interested in that other episode. It's very much the same thing. You want to make sure that you are bringing people together and you are uniting them instead of dividing and you are always bringing people together with you as well and centering people around where
Mm-hmm.
they are in their unique selling proposition or their unique personality, and seeing them really as they are and tailoring how you treat them and lead them to what is best for them, not just what's best for you or the team or whatever.
Now, District Bliss came out of your experience, but tell us about the company. Like how many people do you actually lead within this, and talk about the events. I noticed that you do some events around. Is it around the country, around New York City as well, or
So it's so funny. I'm actually based in the DC area, but the first city that we expanded to outside of DC was New York because it's such an easy train ride
sure,
or
yeah, yeah,
bus ride or whatever it is. But it's so easy to get to New York from DC. So it was a very natural fit for us. But we primarily now are virtual. It's been increasingly difficult to get people from DC to leave their house for networking since
sure.
the pandemic. So we've been leaning into that. I tried to fight against it for a long time, but basically what we do is we are a community of introverted and extroverted business owners who are sick of that stodgy style of networking. We're not about those like shallow handshakes and forgotten business cards that you just end up throwing in your bag and then you never do anything with them. We care about meaningful connections, and we really care about sharing our expertise. So we host roundtables too. So we host networking socials, obviously, that are welcoming and approachable, but like roundtables where you can have a business building conversation and get feedback or support or brainstorm or strategy from other people. Even questions like about online reputation management, like if you have a client who gave you a poor review, how you handle that situation, which is a bit of a sensitive topic.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to take that to like crowdsource out to everyone you know. So it's a very trusting group. And then we also have an educational element because, of course, we do, because I'm a recovering teacher. And so we host workshops and things like that that really help support you so that you don't have to do all the Googling in the world to try to figure out how to host a podcast or whatever the case may be. Because
So
I
the
don't,
educational side of you never left, right? I
yeah,
feel like
never
that's
left.
what I'm hearing here. That's great. Is it fun to teach while on the go, whether it is a wedding? I feel like leadership can also teach. And I love there's a lyric I like, in teaching you will learn and learning you will teach. I feel like you benefit in those ways. So do you find that in teaching you are not only learning about the person, but they're learning from you, and is there a reward there for you?
Absolutely. And I agree with that. I also think that we learn better ourselves by teaching. So when you teach something, it actually goes deeper into what you know. It becomes muscle memory when you teach it, as opposed to just, knowing the fact that you can do this on social media. It's like you're teaching someone else. So now it's ingrained in you. You really know it. And that's a huge difference. But yeah, I mean, I think teaching is a huge part of leadership because you
Mhm.
want to make sure that everyone is at their best, and teaching brings people to their best.
I love your positivity and upbeat, knowing what you've gone through. How did you keep that spirit going for you through those rough times?
Um, I am an eternal optimist, I would say, which is one of the things that is probably helpful. I also have a really good support system, and I learned I learned really well how to set
Mhm.
up boundaries and remove people from my life that were not serving me.
Mhm.
So if they were people who were, you know, depleting an energy that I didn't have, or they weren't, it was one-sided. And I, of course, was a people pleaser too. So there was a bit of that mixed in there. And so I had to learn that sometimes people have a place in your life and it's a beautiful relationship, but then at some point that relationship has run its course and there's nothing wrong with parting ways with that person. And maybe it comes back around and maybe you find each other and it's a better friendship moving forward. But there was a lot of teaching people how to treat me also, because people don't know when you
They
have
probably didn't know how
something.
to ask you, like, "Oh my God, I'm," and I'm sure you heard the "I'm so sorry for you" type of thing, right? And you had to say, "No, I'm fine," and I'm gonna be fine.
Yes.
I get that. Um,
Yeah. And
go for it.
I think, the other thing is like when you have something like PTSD, it is a departure from your personality. So people don't know how to treat you anymore. So you have to
Mm.
kind of teach them how to treat you and that it's okay to ask questions if it is okay. And if it's not, that's okay too. And to let them know, like, of course, you knew just from no, from knowing me for like 10 seconds that it would be okay to ask me questions, but not everybody does. And people get very nervous about it. And I am an open book about it. I'm happy to share because I think it's important that we talk about that kind of stuff. And so I
Now,
think,
do you have kids? I mean, I'm sure that you don't have kids.
no.
Well, I want to ask this because as you're talking about all this and asking questions, um, this attack that happened, I don't feel like it's the only occurrence of kids attacking teachers. I mean, could schools do better? Have you sort of drawn about awareness? Like, yeah, schools could do better protecting their teachers from this type of thing, type of
Yeah,
attack.
this could have been handled better for so many reasons, and some of it was a really unfortunate set of circumstances that occurred. Some of it was very much the PR machine coming in.
Mm,
And I understand that something like this does impact your school's rankings and ratings. And, especially I was in a very good school. So of course they don't want that to have happened. They would like that to just go away. And I think that is a very disappointing thing to learn when you are on the side of the victim, that they would rather the PR be the better situation than you be the better situation than supporting you. Supporting me was not the priority, which was really disappointing. And there were a lot of people I removed from my life that were part of that PR machine. There was also a lot of where there were other teachers who were kind of burnt out that would say things like, um, well, it must be nice to have like a permanent vacation. And I was like, it's a permanent disability that shook, like I have a master's degree in this. It wasn't just a passing fancy that I wanted to be a teacher. This is what I wanted to do my whole life. So now I have to change my identity.
Now, you
And
say permanent disability. Is that confirmed that this will be with
yeah,
you the rest? Oh my gosh.
so I have nerve damage.
Okay.
Technically, nerves can regenerate at a very, very slow rate. It's like portions of a millimeter per decades. However, and I don't know what the actual, please don't use that as a medical recommendation.
Sure.
All of you listeners out there, I am not a
Well,
doctor.
I was gonna say, what inspired you to get back up? I mean, was it the X-ray scans? Did you keep those and say, you know what, this is where I came from. Here's where I'm going to get to now after this. I mean, what inspired you to get back up?
Um, I wanted the life that I had built. I wanted the life that I had built with my husband. I traveled my whole life. My mom was a flight attendant. My husband's a big traveler. I wanted the life that we had built together. And I was getting married when this happened. And so that was also, its own little beast of like dealing with trying to plan a wedding during this was very tough with the uncertainty of not knowing what was going on for so long. But whole different story. Happy to answer questions about that. But it was that I didn't want someone else to have defined my story and defined my life and my relationships and what I could do with that life. So I rewrote it.
That's such a powerful line. I rewrote it. Are you writing a book about all of this reinvention you're going through, or not yet?
I guess not yet. I had never considered it.
Because that line right now tells me you want to write a book. You know what I love about your brand name, District Bliss. We all know DC is not bliss most of the time. So,
True.
do you find that Washington D.C. does have the creatives, the networkers that maybe are overshadowed by the big old capital, the government? I mean, there's that too.
Yes, I do find that. And I think we have some of the coolest, like quirkiest, most brilliant, beautiful creators. And we're all very proud of DC, which is also very funny because we think of it as being not political. Like, I mean, of course it is. Like, you can't escape it. You drive down the street and see the Capitol building. You can't escape politics here. However,
But also, yeah,
um,
I look at the Capitol as such a beautiful building.
it is.
I don't even think of it as politics when I'm down there. I'm like, oh, this is just beautiful to look at. I mean, come on, it's beautiful. And I'm sure you guys have that same mindset as you drive past it. What, 20 times a day? I'm guessing. So,
Yeah, and it never loses that luster either.
mm-hmm.
Going to the Library of Congress, I photograph there all the time. It's one of my favorite places to photograph. And it's so beautiful. Like it's just one of the most amazing buildings that you can actually go into. It does not lose its luster for sure. And yeah, no matter how many times you drive across the bridge from Arlington and you see the monuments, you see the Jefferson and the Washington
Sure.
Monument or the Kennedy Center, it's never going to change that. But I think that those are also the things that do make you
Nationals
really,
Park is right on the Potomac. I love that. It's like
yes.
right there. It's beautiful. I gotta say though, in this networking group that you have, are there any aspiring politicians? Because DC can also inspire that. So any kind of people that want to get into politics that go through District Bliss, or is there a separate? Do you keep that separate?
I don't think we have anyone that is an aspiring politician. That's an interesting question. No one's ever asked me that. And I honestly have never thought about it. I don't think we do. I try not to let any of that come into the conversation as much as possible. Of course, if we're talking about weddings, it's very
I
hard
got
not
you.
to
Yeah,
have
yeah,
that
yeah.
pop up periodically. But if we're not talking about weddings, then it might just be a regular conversation about business building. That's an interesting question. I'm very curious if anyone has ever thought about going into politics that's in District Bliss.
Now, are some of these networkers also aspiring CEOs wanting to build their business? Are they CEOs already? Like, have you seen companies launch thanks to District Bliss?
Yes, actually, because we've been in business since 2014. So we have quite
Oh,
a bit of,
beautiful. 10,
yeah.
10-year anniversary just passed.
Yes, yes. So we've had a couple of photographers who, when they first, it was like their first gig was with me. Their first wedding ever was with me, and now they've photographed like hundreds of weddings. They travel all over the world. We've had so many people come out of bookkeepers who have brought on 15 team members, and now they have bookkeeping and operations management and
Hmm.
fractional CFOs, and expanded their teams drastically and offerings. When you cut a lot of that extra time out and you get to meet the right people, it does really help you build your business so much faster.
You talk about uh, time and taking that time for yourself. Does District Bliss also encourage self care? I mean, I feel like that name Bliss has self care sort of in it, right?
It does, yes. And if I have to Slack the community on a weekend, I will schedule it so that Monday it goes out because I don't want anyone looking at their Slack for business stuff on the weekend. We really like keep it very much personal boundaries. If somebody reaches out on the weekend and they're like, I'm working this weekend, I'm like, I hope you take off another day this week then in order to get back some of that personal time or and of course, like sometimes you have to work on the weekends, right? Like especially weddings.
Hmm.
But if I'm going into like being out of the country for 3 weeks, I'm gonna have to put in a little extra time leading up to that and a little extra time on the back end too. But for the most part, yeah, we bring in like breath work specialists that are really helpful for and like vocal specialists, because if you're a speaker, then you want to be able to like think about where your voice comes from and where you're grounding your voice, and you don't want to be exhausting it. So then you're coming in with vocal fry on like podcasts or whatever the case may be. So it's very much baked in there. We also do a lot of productivity stuff that will
So
help
it's
you
not
like,
just your regular networking
yeah.
outlet. You're right, because I mean, I love the networkers up here. I think they're great. I think you can find a community, but it's about the follow up, right? And it sounds to me like you guys don't only just follow up. You say, okay, here's a resource for you. That's so important. Uh, Speaking of podcasts and all that, you take your extroverted nature onto the podcast. What's the wedding dish? I mean, is that about gossip that you hear at the weddings, or what is that dish? What do you dish out?
That's really funny, and it would be a whole different show if it was about gossip, which could be equally entertaining. So the wedding dish is the conversations that you wish you could find those answers somewhere on Google. They're not like the things that you find on the Knot. It's the actual stuff that goes into a wedding from different vendors' points of view. And sometimes it's managing family dynamics or managing your own grief surrounding the fact that things aren't you didn't get to have X, Y, or Z that you really were hoping you would. And sometimes it's like just tips, or like a lot of the stuff you see on Instagram is styled shoots, which is like
Mm,
if you're looking at a styled shoot, which for anyone that isn't baked into this and is curious what that is, it's basically like a group of wedding vendors who would work on a wedding come together. They do one table to the nines, and then they
wow.
bring in a couple and then they photograph it like it's an event. And it's to showcase like what you would like couples to envision. Like, this is the style I like, so this is who I want. Whoever sees this is going to come to me, so there's a purpose to it. It's your marketing stuff. It's kind of like aspirational, I guess, if that's
Yeah,
the best way of describing it. But those tables can cost like it could be a $10,000, $20,000 table because it's like all these flowers, this like, and it's just one table. And those
sure.
people own those things. So they
Yeah.
aren't renting them and whatever. So sometimes it's talking about that kind of thing, like what realistic expectations need to be, because it's really hard when you have an unrealistic expectation and then you have the grief that process that you go through because you can't
The
achieve.
letdown.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know there was a couple that actually was married and like nobody showed up to the wedding. That was just heartbreaking to see. It was all over on my TikTok. I saw it. I'm like, how is that possible? But I know
Oh,
it's probably not that deep an expectation fail, but it's one of those things to look out for, and that also encourages. I'm sure you're not a counselor to the couple, right? But I feel like you got to be if you're in that wedding day team, right? I mean, my mom, a minister of 20 plus years, was only the minister. She was counseling them. She had to make sure
mhm.
the photographer was in place. I mean, she worked her tail off to make sure all those were arranged. And I'm sure you have a great flow with whoever the minister is that day to make this a real successful day.
Yes, absolutely. It's very much being the support system and being there and hands-on. I think that is one of the things that really sets me apart as a photographer is that I will seek out my couples and check in with them all the time. And even if their wedding's 2 years away, I'm still going to be in touch with them on a very regular basis. So I know what's going on. And so they
Uh,
know I'm there if they have questions. And it takes me what, like 10 minutes to answer a question about tan lines or something. And whereas like if otherwise they're just worrying about it and they don't know what to do.
Also, it takes you 10 seconds to reach out. That's such an important thing. Like it just takes 10 seconds to follow up with your couple. I like that. When the season is out, right? So wedding season not really in right now because it's freezing out and
It's
no one's
so
doing the
cold.
outdoor stuff. How do you balance that time? Do you find yourself having to focus on District Bliss and then when wedding season comes, it's full force wedding photography, or how do you balance that when the season is hot and going about?
That is exactly what it is. So I build up District Bliss and get everything in place. It's kind of like wedding season is a vacation, in a way of like my availability is going to be much more limited to District Bliss. So we still have events, we still have all that, but I close out my calendar for the 2 weeks following a wedding. And then that's my like really focused editing time so that I'm not bouncing back and forth to other things. And I have all my out of the office stuff set up where it's like delayed response kind of things. Because I'm not technically out of the office, but I want to set expectations that I'm unavailable, I'm less available, and it's going to take longer to hear back. But my group knows that, they know Sarah's going into wedding season. She's going to be less available for the next 2 weeks. And I lead with transparency as well, which means I let them know, hey, I have a wedding this weekend. You're not going to see me much for the next 2 weeks. You'll see me at events, but you're not going to see me popping into the Slack channel as much. If you need something, here's how to get the support you need, and here's who to go to on my team. And if you need me, please let me know. I will get to you as quickly as I can.
Communication, that's how you become a leader and a CEO, am I right?
Yes, exactly.
I gotta ask you this before we wrap up here. This has been amazing. I want to keep talking, but I know you gotta get back to Bliss, and I want to keep you on for another show. I'd love to have you on as we get
Oh,
closer
I'm
to wedding
always
season.
happy to come back. Also, you
Um,
should come to one of our networking socials at
oh,
District
I
Bliss
will.
too.
I was gonna say the partnership between New York and Washington. Is it is it transversal? Is that the word I'm looking for? Is it you know does it work both ways? Meaning, do people go up to New York for these events still, or is that not happening as much?
We haven't done as many in New York lately. It's a lot of the people that we worked with when, pre-pandemic, there's been so much shift in who's still doing the same thing. So, it felt a little bit
Do your
more.
weddings ever take you to New York? I mean, you ever come up to New York for weddings and whatnot?
Yes, yes. I'm in New York a couple times a year still. It's I'm probably there once a year just to like visit friends. We still have a lot of friends who live in New York.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
yeah. My husband went to NYU for grad school.
Oh, very cool. That's awesome. Well, yeah, if you're ever in the summer in New York, would love to come and meet you. That would be great.
Yeah,
So,
that would be wonderful. I would love that.
I don't know if I should mention her on here, but if you happen to know my mom, Lori Sue Brockway, she's a minister of 20 years. Do you know my mom at all?
I've
Or
heard her name. I think she came to one of our events like a million years ago. Well, it's not a million years ago, but whenever, probably 2016, I want to say she came to an
okay,
event.
yeah, she's now got her a master's in public history, so she's now going into another kind of realm. But when I talk weddings, I think of her because she's my mom, and the photographer got a great picture of her and I when I was really little, and we keep that picture to this day. So um,
Oh,
we know Ben Asen. I don't know if you know who Ben Asen is, but he's a wedding photographer here in New York. And the cool thing is, I don't know if you do this, but I noticed some of my mom's couples come back when they have a reunion here, and they bring back the wedding photographer too back to the site of the wedding. I think that's so cool, like a vow renewal and whatnot. So I don't know if
I
that's
love
happened to
when
you,
people
but
do that. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I usually, if I photograph weddings, I end up photographing maternity sessions if they're going to have children, or like family sessions, and like they'll come back. I have couples who live in Hawaii who will fly back here for their annual family photos,
oh,
which is just like the sweetest. It's the best.
well, I'd be remiss if I didn't end the show, but before asking, if I didn't end the show by asking, how do we get in touch with you? How do people who are out there wanting to get married soon or have a wedding, planning idea, want to get in touch with you? What's the best way?
So my photo business, because they're technically two different businesses, is photos from the Harty, Harty. My maiden name is Hartenstein, and that was my nickname growing up, Harty. Um, and I'm a big punny girl. So
Okay.
my Instagram is at photos from heart, Hart. And then if you're looking to do some networking, which I hope you will be coming to do soon, I'll send you a free ticket for one next month.
Oh, love
Um,
that.
it's districtbliss.com, and our Instagram is at District Bliss Events. And you can find the wedding dish on both of those websites.
And one last thing, why'd you join PodMatch? I'm curious. I always like to ask my friends from PodMatch why they joined us here.
I spoke at Podcast Movement.
Yeah, and I was supposed to go to that this past year in DC, but didn't happen. I'm sure it was a fun event though.
I spoke at the one in Nashville.
Oh, in Nashville.
So, yeah, which I had never been to Nashville, so that was really fun. But we spoke about recording live to tape, which is like where you don't actually edit other than equalizing and leveling the audio. You
Mhm.
don't cut out anything, you just let it fly as it is. And
Believe it or
it
not, I do that with my podcast. I don't believe it should be edited. Just a raw conversation. You know what I mean? So I get that.
It builds authenticity. I was going to ask you. That was why I was defining it for the audience. I was going to ask you if you also record live to tape because I suspected you did based on the way you have such a conversational style and then you really engage with your audience in that way. I think it brings people in and makes them more dedicated listeners to record like that. So I met somebody from PodMatch there, and so I signed up on a whim, and then I happened to log in the other day. And that's how we connected.
And boom, the rest is history, as they say. Well, guess what? I'm going to subscribe to your both podcasts and follow along. As I say, I like your personality and I like your energy. So keep it up and good luck with everything in 2025. Happy New Year! Is it too late to say that? I don't think it's too late to say that,
I
right?
don't think it's too late to say that. I think we get to say it for all of January. And I feel the same way. Thank you so much for having me on. This was so fun. You're just so wonderful, and I'm really glad that we connected.
Sara Alepin, District Bliss CEO. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right.